Tuberculosis, an infectious disease caused by bacteria, is an ancient illness which has plagued humanity for thousands of years, causing significant illness and death. And as we'll learn from today's podcast, it has impacted society in a variety of different ways. Bacterial cause, it's an infectious disease that primarily attacks the lungs, but can spread to other parts of the body. In this way, it is a very strange disease. But there are two main forms: latent, with no symptoms, and active, which is symptomatic and contagious. The discovery of the TB bacteria was in 1882 by Robert Koch, and development of antibiotics thereafter offered a cure. But early treatments included such things as isolating the patients in places known as sanatoriums. And in today's episodes, we're going to learn about how sanatoriums were utilized in Iceland during their fight against tuberculosis. But uneven progress with fighting this disease over the last century or so means that still today in impoverished countries, low-income areas, they are still affected by tuberculosis, whereas wealthy nations have seen a dramatic decline due to improved living standards, sanitation, healthcare, access to antibiotics, and all of these sorts of things. Globally, there are an estimated 1.8 billion people today who have latent tuberculosis, but with that version cannot transmit it. Active TB cases, on the other hand, affect about 10 million people worldwide each year. But as we know here at Icelandic Roots, the past is a roadmap for the future. And so by studying history, we can make better decisions and develop effective strategies for dealing with issues in the future and for understanding where we're heading. So it is with that, I welcome you to today's podcast episode, where we get to hear from María Pálsdóttir, who runs the Hælið Museum just near Akureyri, which is all about tuberculosis and its impact it's had at Iceland. And this museum is housed in what used to be an active sanatorium building that helped to treat tuberculosis cases. I hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you for listening. All right, wonderful. Well, María, thank you very much for agreeing to do the podcast with me here today. How are you doing over there in Akureyri?
Thank you. I'm doing very well, and I'm excited to join your podcast. It's an honor. Here we got a lot of snow. It's melting because it's like around 0 degrees. And yeah, we were kind of hoping we would get spring, but it's not coming, not the next days, I guess.
Yes, I think at least here throughout Canada, and I think northern USA as well, the winter has been kind of really like off and on. Some very mild, warm temperatures, and then cold again too. So it's been a very interesting winter.
Yeah, we've had a very mild winter, and we thought the spring was here, but then it started to snow like, I don't know what. It's crazy.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, so for a little bit of context, I suppose, for those listening, I was on the Icelandic Roots trip last September, myself and a number of other volunteers, and we stopped by the Hælið Museum on tuberculosis, which, and you can give more details about this, but from what I understand was an old sanatorium where they actually used to treat and house patients with tuberculosis. And first of all, it was a really, really well done exhibit and just a wonderful atmosphere. And it's kind of so interesting, isn't it? It's such a dark aspect of history and such a sad dynamic, but going through it was like a very welcoming space. And I think the sort of humanity and the optimism was really highlighted throughout the museum. So as much as this is a really sad part of our history, and maybe we can talk about a bit later on, still a disease that is prevalent in the world. But despite that, it was still a like welcoming experience, and something that, you didn't go home feeling depressed after. You felt, these were good stories, and it's interesting to learn that history. So maybe if you could share a bit more detail about how you got involved with this work, and maybe just the more recent history of the Hælið Museum would be wonderful.
Thank you for these kind words, because I'm very glad to hear that you thought it was welcoming and optimistic. That was my goal, not to make everybody go home and be depressed.
Yes.
So I grew up in very close to this old sanatorium, and when I was growing up I was born 1970. So when I was growing up, this old sanatorium had changed its role. It was for older people. And the sanatorium itself, the museum is not in the sanatorium itself, but it's in the staff quarters, you can say. The staff was living in where I put my museum up. But when I was growing up, it was an elderly home, but I knew in my back head that it had been tuberculosis, but I didn't realize what tuberculosis was when I was a kid. I heard it, I knew it, and then you just went on having fun. And we used to play every night in the summer. There were a lot of kids growing up in this little village around the sanatorium, and it was so much fun. And everything was so neat. I remember everything was so pretty. It was like a idyllic little village. People came and they just... they gasped because there were flowers everywhere, flowers along all paths, and it was very, well kept, you can say. Around 93, I think, it changed somehow the ownership, and the hospital in Akureyri had to take over all the buildings, the sanatorium, all the staff buildings, and the people that were maintaining it, they were just, fired. They had to find another job. And the poor people maintaining this hospital in Akureyri also had to maintain the houses in the sanatorium building. So that's when everything began to deteriorate. The flowers disappeared. The houses went like... the big building, the sanatorium, was very well kept, because then they started to do the rehabilitation there from the hospital. So the big building has always been well kept, but all the surroundings and all the houses around it, they started to look bad. And when I was visiting my parents 2015, I lived in the south. I lived in Mosfellsbær. I had just built a house with my husband and 3 kids. I took a little walk down memory lane to the village, and I was like shaking my head. Oh, no, this can't be happening. Look at all these houses. They're so horrible. Why doesn't someone do something about this? And then it struck me, why don't you just do something? I mean, I'm grown up. I'm 45. I can do something. That's where this idea came from. Mm-hmm. And I had started to work in the tourist business, so I thought it had to be something for visitors to visit. And of course, you had to connect it to history. Mm-hmm. And of course, history is like, we have a different history around this area, because Helgi Magri, one of the settlers, he settled in Kristnes. So that was another history connection I could have chosen, but I thought that tuberculosis was much more interesting. And also because I didn't know anything about it. And then I started digging and reading and learning, and I was so amazed, because I didn't realize how awful it was, how many died, I just thought it's about time we tell these stories, because there's no place you can go and learn about it in one place. You can look in some books, you can read this biography or this biography, but there's no place you can just come and suck it in somehow.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where I started to cultivate this idea. Was this the answer to your question, or what was your question?
Yes, no, I think so, for sure. Yeah. And I think it gave even more context around that, because it's so interesting that, again, you kind of, as you were exploring this, discovered a lot along the way and realized that, hey, this is something that you yourself didn't know too much about. So instead of just learning, you've also learned, but then provided this environment for everyone else to come and learn also.
And in that period, when I was thinking about it, and I was like talking to people about this idea, I got very mixed reflection. How do you say it?
Reaction.
Mixed answers. A reaction, because somebody said, "Oh no, you don't want to touch this. Are you going to make money out of others' misery?" And I was like, I'm not thinking about the money in it. I'm more thinking about the value of, and honoring the memory of the people who died. Isn't that something? So I had a little discussion about why am I doing this, and I realized if I'm going to do it, I have to do it with respect, and I have to do it with love. It has to be something. It has to be welcoming. It has to be optimistic. And I learned when I read all the letters from the patients that it wasn't about just sorrow, grief, loss, despair. It was also about optimism, lust for life, and all these things also. It was so much stronger through all the letters and diaries I read. Nobody talked about this disease. People were talking about the dance and about Christmas and about the walks, about how much fun they were having. Not many people were like dwelling on the disease. So I thought it was important to take that, how do you say it, poll.
Yeah, sort of just taking the human side of it, right?
Yeah. And instead of just listing some numbers and statistic, it has to be about the patient, the personal histories, stories of people.
Well, and I think that's how people learn too. Like going to a museum, if it's just full of information and facts and numbers, I don't know, for most people, I don't think it really resonates. It has to be like you see yourself in that person's shoes,
Yeah.
or just imagine, what you would do in those sorts of scenarios. And recently, I guess just last week, Icelandic Roots, we did a book club with Martha Brooks, who wrote a book called Dear Miss Lovelorn, Prose and Possibility. And it was walking through kind of like how we're discussing now, showing the human experience of going through tuberculosis and dealing with these sorts of issues, but doing it in a way that was very like, like a story and quite poetic in many ways too. But through the book club discussion, I was so surprised how many people in the conversation were telling stories about maybe it was their parents or grandparents and their Icelandic relatives, and how tuberculosis touched, somebody in their family, and all these different stories. And one also came from someone who was talking about growing up in Iceland, where him as a baby and other babies at that time were made to sleep outside. And I don't know exactly if they were just pushed out in the cribs or maybe kept somewhere with more fresh air, but that was a theory at the time, right? Was the fresh air was a sort of treatment for it, or a way to prevent tuberculosis.
That makes sense. It's funny. Maybe that's related because we still let our children sleep in the trolleys outside. Everybody does, and maybe that's something remained from the tuberculosis, because in all the sanatoriums, there were two specially built sanatoriums in Iceland. They made these places where they could lie outside, on benches, just covered with some blankets, and that's once a day. Everybody went out. That those who were that. Maybe not those who had to lie down all the time, but those who could walk around. They were, they had to go out for a nap. That might be connected.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. But just in general, hearing those stories and seeing how today, feeling so far removed from this, and I think it was honestly the first time that I realized about tuberculosis was at the museum. I think I'd, heard of these things, but to me it was maybe just like smallpox or like these other diseases that I think are just part of history now. But then as I was thinking and as we were talking through the museum, I realized that, maybe I have heard before that it is still like a disease that people can get. It's mostly, though, in countries that don't have the health standards that we've developed now. So it's very interesting. I don't know, is there anything that you could speak to about that?
Yeah, it's in 1976, the tuberculosis in Kristnes was closed because it was like everything. We were curing the disease very fast here in Iceland. In 1983, Iceland declared we don't have tuberculosis anymore. And how do you say, the International Health System Board, WHO?
Yeah, World Health Organization.
Yeah, they always wanted to, get rid of tuberculosis. And they said, year 2000, we're not going to have it anymore. And then they have moved the year. And now they say, I think the last aim is like 2030, no tuberculosis. But I think everybody realizes now we will always have it because it's impossible to wipe it out, because those who have it, they have to be treated with medicine that you have to take for like 9 months or something, and it costs a fortune. It's very expensive. So it's very unrealistic to think that we can end it in the whole wide world, because we know how the standard in the healthcare system is in some of the countries. So we will just keep fighting, and we are still getting with Icelanders who travel around or people visiting Iceland. We always get some cases of tuberculosis every now and then.
Yeah.
So this hasn't gone, but we were quite efficient here in Iceland to cure it when we got the medicine. Finally, 1950 we got the medicine. So until then we didn't have anything except from these horrible surgeries.
Yeah, and throughout the museum, some great displays. I don't know if great is the right word. These were a bit more
horrible.
Yes, but just showing some of like the tools and the different medical equipment that was used back then, and things that look very scary to today's the way medicine is today, but also just examples of some of these surgeries, like removing the ribs and that sort of thing. So maybe you can talk about some of these ways that they did try to treat tuberculosis.
Yeah, it was a strange disease because it was so different. It was very personal. Some people it only had to go to the sanatorium for a few months. They had the good food that was provided. They had some good rest in clean beds. It was warm. It was just, everything was so right that the immune system just somehow got rid of the tuberculosis, and they just worked healthy after a few months. While others weren't that lucky and had to stay there for months and months and even years and years, and maybe died in the end. So it was very different from person to person. And in the beginning, when we didn't have the medicine, they used this I can't remember the English word. I don't know the pronunciation, but you take this big needle and you puncture here in the chest. Be careful not to puncture the lungs, but then you put air. You somehow push air with this little equipment that is on a display there. You push the air into the chest, so finally the lung will collapse because of the different
pressure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when the lung is collapsed and doesn't move, it won't get any oxygen. No oxygen will come to the tuberculosis inside the lungs, and then it would heal. But the air would leak out of the chest, so you had to go and have that puncture every week or 10 days or so. And some people, after a few months, they were cured, while other people had to go for this puncture for years.
Wow.
And some people didn't get cured at all. And then you took the next level, the horrible surgery on your back, when you just cut your back open, you scratch the meat of the ribs, and then you cut the ribs out and you take them out. And then you manually can make the lung collapse, but that was not reversible. The lung would not start working again. It was much more final, this surgery. And some people lived after this surgery. Amazing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
And how was that for you, like researching these things? And
I was just amazed all the time. I was maybe most amazed when I found on YouTube by coincidence this recording from 1925. I think it was from Boston. I found this recording of a surgery where they were removing ribs, and they were also doing the puncture surgery. So I was just, wow, how did someone think of recording this? What an amazing thing! And it's here. It's I could use it, and I got a permission. It was no problem, and I was just wow.
Was that the one where you kind of look through that small?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I really remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was like a wow. I'm so lucky that this is available, because I had in my mind, I had some idea. I thought they cut you from the front side, not from the back. I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, really quite fascinating. And what a what a thing to imagine.
But this was only if you had it in your lungs.
Right, okay.
And it wasn't always just in your lungs. My grandfather, and this nobody told me until I started digging in this thing. I was told that my grandfather had tuberculosis in his elbow. He was just a young kid. And the doctor said, we have to take his arm here, by the shoulder. And my great-grandmother said, no, you can't. So he kept his arm, and he got cured. He got better there were no medicine, there was no cure. He just got better, lucky. He kept his arm, but his arm was always like weak. He couldn't even wash his hair himself. But he could teach German in high school. That was no problem. But he didn't have a strong right arm. But that's all. Yeah. So you could have tuberculosis almost everywhere, I think.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Then it just being sort of a really strange kind of disease. And now I understand you're not necessarily a medical researcher, but to the best of your abilities, can you describe what you do know about the disease and how it affects people?
Yeah, some symptoms maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, the first thing people noticed, they lost weight. Their clothes were bigger, and then they got the fever. And then that was like a sign you should go and check if you have the tuberculosis. And it's a bacteria. And it is like similar with COVID. It transmits through air. So if you have the tuberculosis in your lungs and it is like an open wound and you cough, the bacteria is in the air, and it can, it falls to the ground and it stays there and it lives there for a bit. So if the bacteria is on the floor and then this woman in a long skirt comes and the skirt touches the floor and the bacteria flies up again, you could easily get the disease if you breathe this bacteria. So it was it had an impact on fashion. The skirts got shorter.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it also changed the way of the beard, the beard that the man had. They removed the sideburns because the beard was like a good place for the bacteria to hide in. So everything changed. A lot of things changed. And I can't really explain why some got it in the lungs and other got it in their fingers. There's a story of one young girl. She was not even 2 years old. She got it in her fingers and her legs, and I'm guessing they must have had some wounds that the bacteria got into. It must have been something like that.
Right. Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, but still, I've got a lot of question marks still. From Greenland, we had a few years ago a young patient. It was just a tiny baby, like a newborn, very very sick. It came in a helicopter from Greenland to Iceland, and it died in the hands of the doctors. And they did autopsy, and they found out that the child had tuberculosis in her brain. And I can't imagine where that comes from.
Right.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I mean, you mentioned comparison to, COVID and the recent pandemic that we've went through. And this is something that, you see all of these patterns, like similar stories of what you're talking about, how it changed fashion, for example, back in the tuberculosis days. We'll think about recently and wearing masks and these sorts of things. These diseases and viruses really just change how we operate and change the way human society is structured. And that's, we had a recent experience of this. But I think the biggest thing I've learned is that, none of this was brand new or crazy. This is just all throughout human history. These things happen and they change. And what it taught me the most throughout this entire pandemic was that I do not know enough about history, and that I was very ignorant about how much sickness, diseases, viruses affect human history.
Interesting. Probably many people are experiencing similar things that they don't know so much about these old diseases that have always been.
Yeah.
And for me, it was very interesting because I've been inviting kids from school in the 6th grade, 12 years old, to come and visit. And I go around and talk about it. And after COVID, it's so much easier because they understand concepts like you're contaminated, you're smitten without symptoms. You can be contaminating people, but you don't have any symptoms, because that was the same thing with tuberculosis. You maybe didn't feel anything. You were just healthy and strong, but you were like contaminating everyone around you. And all this, it was so funny. It was so much easier to explain tuberculosis for them after the COVID, because then everybody understood.
Yeah, I think it taught us a lot, and also I think piqued the interest too. Right, like I mentioned, it's you start to see different things that we're doing, and you realize that we're just kind of repeating the different strategies that we have on how to fight diseases and infections and those sorts of things. Do you know if the Spanish flu in 1918 and that era, was that something that affected Iceland?
Yeah. Oof. It was horrible. This winter was horrible. Wasn't it 1918 here in Iceland, I think. And then we had this very, very tough winter the same year. So people were just dying. It was just horrible situation. I've read some books about it, and I think they published a very good book about the Spanish flu. And it was just horrible. And in fact, it affected Iceland a lot.
Yeah. And well, that's interesting how you can then have that combined with, like you mentioned, a really bad winter, and how now you have two factors that can make life really difficult, right? A sickness, and then also just the weather factors too.
Yeah. It was not easy. Oof.
Yeah. And I think for myself as an example, just being a young person trying to learn and figure things out in the world, without having people like my Avi or other, older folks in my life to tell me these stories, or for them, maybe they knew their grandparents and that sort of thing. These stories passed down. Without that, I wouldn't have this understanding. And I think it's very important, especially to think about the future. You need to kind of know the history of all sorts of different things. And I think it makes us also realize how lucky we are today that we do have modern medicine and an understanding of life in these ways. It's very...
I sometimes, when the kids come to visit, I say, do you remember how long it took us to find medicine for COVID? Do you remember, kids? And they say, yeah, it was almost 2 years. Yes, yeah, it was a long time, wasn't it? Can you imagine how long it took us for find medicine for tuberculosis? And then they start guessing. Was it 5 years, 10 years? Because we talk about the tuberculosis came to Iceland around 1900, but it's like it probably was here all the time, but it kind of blew up around 1900. So it's 50 years. We waited for the medicine 50 years, and they can't understand it. So it's it's nice to put in context. I mean, we thought 2 years is a long time. Aren't they bringing the medicine? Oh.
Yes, no, you're really right. And then transportation, I would imagine too. I was reading a book about Arctic areas in Canada, and I actually don't recall now. I don't know if this was tuberculosis or not. It was some other disease, maybe similar during that time, but it was about a dog sled, a person who was having to transport this, maybe it was a vaccine or it was some sort of formula for them to help these small villages in the high North Arctic. And the only way to get there was on dog sled. And it was just such an interesting story about having to go through that way to transport it. Whereas again, today, not only can we develop medicines more quickly, but then we can just transport them and we can get them all the way around the world. So
that's amazing. One interesting part talking about transportation, and that's also a thing I talk about at the museum. It's we had this tuberculosis doctor. He was put in charge 1935, and he had to go to the States to learn everything about tuberculosis. And he came back, and he brought this, how do you call it? Traveling. My English is gone. This chest ray.
X-ray?
Yeah. Traveling X-ray machine. He brought it it was in a heavy suitcase, and he traveled around the country for many, many summers, maybe 4 or 5 summers. And 1935, we didn't have roads in Iceland, almost no roads. So he went on his horse. Sometimes he used boats, and sometimes he could use a car. So he traveled, and he found all these people that didn't have any symptoms, but were still transmitting the disease, and he could take them and put them away in the sanatorium. So then we took down because we had the highest death rate per capita in Europe, and we went down to the lowest death rate per capita in only a few years, because he was so efficient with his X-ray machine.
Yeah.
Must have been quite something.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and that's another great story. Iceland, I don't know. I think there's other examples too. There's a podcast I'm going to do soon about infant mortality in Iceland. So I don't know all the details, but one of the volunteers with Icelandic Roots has written some articles, and again, she'll join me here soon for a podcast. But it was, I don't know the time frame of this, but essentially Iceland had a really high infant mortality rate, so much higher than other European countries, and they didn't really know exactly why. And then they started, figuring out different things. I think one aspect was they were actually preferring to not breastfeed their babies and thought that it was healthier and better to just have
cow milk.
Yeah, or something like this. Yeah. And so there was just these different things that they were doing that weren't exactly right. But then once they realized, these things that they could fix, it was really quickly to change that. And
wow.
It seems to me that a lot of aspects of Icelandic history are something was like not being done very well, but then once they learned better, it was like really quick, and things just changed really fast in Iceland once they learn how.
Maybe because we are so few and always
Yes.
been.
Yeah. I think there's something to smaller population. Maybe it can be both good and bad, right? If you don't have resources and that sort of thing. Yes. So, I guess I think I was going to ask more. Maybe if anything comes to mind, just talking about this history and then thinking about the future. Like within the museum, there's that display on the wall, that timeline, and then it shows these dates, kind of some dates that you've mentioned here, and then it brings to the modern era with the recent pandemic. And to me, I think that really does well to get people to, exactly like how we've been talking, think about, okay, now I understand the past and see where I'm at in the present. Then we can think about the future and maybe be more prepared, or even just hopefully to prevent more diseases and these sorts of things from happening.
But it's so funny. When I was doing this timeline, it was the pandemic had just hit us, but I was so caught up in my things. I had been doing this timeline for weeks and months, and now it was in the printing, So, and then the pandemic hit us, but I couldn't I didn't register. I just took the timeline from the print factory and walked out, and they shouted at me when I walked out, "Didn't you have COVID on it as well?" And I was like, "Oh no, oh my God," because I was so in the middle of my thing and I couldn't take in this new one. So I just put, when it was an expensive printing, so I didn't do it again. I just put the COVID above the line, and it's even better. It was so funny how your mind works. You're not realizing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Did it change your perspective? Like going through the pandemic, were maybe you less afraid because of you were so understanding of this history of it, or?
Yeah, I think I was just amazed how people reacted to this disease. It was just amazing to discover how they didn't let it put them down, how they just kept on, how they just hold on to the happy moments, to the positive things. It was just amazing to learn. And then I just realized humans are so amazing. They are so amazing. They just have this survival strength. So they just want to survive, and they want to enjoy life while they can. And it was one history. It's not from Kristnes, it's from the Vífilsstaðir, the other sanatorium. And I read it in this biography by Rannveig Löwe. That's her name. This is a very good biography if you want to put yourself in the shoes of a patient that went through this and got cured, because she did that, and it's a very, very informative biography. And she is talking about, she is in this room with 8 other women, and she starts every morning by complaining, "Oh, I had to leave my child behind," because her husband was also at the sanatorium, and she was always complaining, "Oh, poor me, my child is only 1 year old, and it has to stay back with my parents," and she was just, complaining. And finally, one woman in the room said, "You are not the only one." And then she realized all these women here, they have all the same story. They all had to leave their children, their family, but no one is complaining. And she just shut her mouth. She said, she describes it funnily in the book, that she didn't complain ever again. And it was that was something that they didn't have to mention, but maybe for some specific people that didn't realize. But normally you didn't complain.
Yeah. Well, that's a good perspective to have. And that was a slogan used often during the pandemic, right? That we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I think maybe more so, right? It's different now because we can talk to people all around the world. So I don't know. I imagine those in Iceland, as you're describing, fighting tuberculosis at that time. Yes, they had their other people in the sanatorium with them, but I don't know if they would have had them understanding that there's people all around the world that are also struggling with this too. And I think that can help if you realize it's not just you, and there's more people out there.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also a funny thing that tuberculosis was called the romantic disease. Have you heard that?
No.
The romantic disease. Maybe because it hit poor people. Probably more poor people that were living in bad conditions, but it also struck rich people that had everything perfect around them. One thing is that if your house was like maybe not so clean or dry, if it was wet or saggy or cold, maybe you were more likely to get the tuberculosis. So poor authors, poor writers in Europe, many of the famous writers got tuberculosis. Mm-hmm. So it became a poet or writer's disease, and it was somehow connected with romance, romanticism more.
Yeah.
And also because when you had tuberculosis and in the final states, you had been coughing up blood a lot, so you didn't have much blood left in your body. So you had these gray circles around your eyes, and your cheek were often very red because of the fever, and your lips were also very red. And this is today's makeup. This is how we use makeup today. We make our eyes smoky, and we put on our cheeks and lips. And this, I read somewhere that this was from the tuberculosis look, because that was considered romantic.
Wow, that's very interesting. It's little things like that. If you don't learn that, you have no idea what inspires things, right?
And we have a lot of operas. More than one opera that and also there's a musical Moulin Rouge. Have you heard about Moulin Rouge? But it's like it happens back when we had the tuberculosis, and the leading singer is dying from tuberculosis, but still she can sing a whole aria coughing and with her handkerchief and blood. So it has been also written about, and this disease has been taken into our culture somehow in both books and operas and
yeah. I think that's what I meant with going through the pandemic. I realized that there was so much about history I didn't know, because I think exactly like what you're saying, it's so much of our culture is inspired and influenced by these aspects of history. Now, did you mention when we first started recording that you've been busy with things and acting? Is this
I'm an actress.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with Hælið, but maybe but because I really love telling stories, so that's how maybe because of my theatrical background, it helped me a lot to put this stories on display. I knew that I've been to many museums and displays, and if you only see text or if you only see pictures, and if it's too monotonic, or how do you say it, if it's too like not varied, then I get bored. I lose focus. And so I knew that I had to take theater into it and make some, it has to be scenography. You have to walk through like you're in the theater. It has to be scenography. So that helped me a lot to make it look like it looks, and I'm very happy about it. And I also had a very nice girl with me, a woman who is she studied scenography, and we met in the. She came here to work in the local theater, and I was introduced to her, and she was so amazing to do this with me. But I'm just working in the theatre of Akureyri in an Icelandic play by an Icelandic author from Akureyri, Þorvaldur Þorsteinsson, and this play is called And Björk, of course. The name is English, And Björk, of course, and it refers to when we are talking to Icelanders and introduce ourselves and talking about our culture, we name our singer Björk. Everybody knows Björk, and Björk, of course.
I see.
So we have been playing that first here in Akureyri, and then we went to the City Theatre in Reykjavik, and we are now performing it there in April. So I'm just going back and forth now, Akureyri, Reykjavik.
Wow. When is I'm going to be in Iceland, quite soon, April 22nd to May 16. I'll be in Reykjavik, but then also in Hofsós too.
Okay, the last performance is I think, the last performance is 27th of April, I think.
Wow, in Reykjavik.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you go to tix.is, you can check what's going on, and you just search for And Björk, of course. Then you can see all the dates. I think the last one is 27th or the 8th. Okay. It's a Sunday, 28th of April, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll definitely look into that. I've been going to more theater here where I live, and I think it'd be really cool to go to a play in Iceland. That's would be wonderful.
Can you understand the Icelandic?
Well, not so much, but maybe this would be a great, one of those tactics to help with my learning is experience it in a theater setting too.
Yeah, it's 3 hours. I'm just warning you, it's 3 hours. And it's a very funny play. It's funny and it's uncomfortable. It's touching all kinds of taboos, but it's very funny also. And we are all together in a self-help course. So it's like a situation. It's not like a typical play with a beginning and an end. It's just situation. Yeah, you should come.
Oh, that sounds very, very creative.
It was a very good author, playwright, this Þorvaldur. He died too early. Yeah, what can I tell you? Tomorrow I'm having a group for a visit at Hælið, 20 people from traveling agencies in Reykjavik, and I'm very, very much hoping that they will maybe send their travelers to me, because I haven't yet got these, these fixed groups that visit, that come visiting. No, I haven't never had that, but hopefully that will change.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a wonderful experience for our group, and God, I should know how many of us there were. I think it was 25 maybe, or almost maybe 30. But it was, really, really wonderful. And it was a great tour that you provided for us, and some great food. I forget exactly. I think we must have had some sort of cake and coffee.
I think I baked the hjónabandsæla for you, didn't I? Happy marriage cake.
Ah, yes.
I think so. I can't remember though. But, everybody who comes and visits is very happy, but I just have to get more visitors, and I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, I really do mean it. It was a wonderful exhibit, and by now I've been to so many museums and different things in Iceland that. After a while, you do really notice the ones that stand out, and Hælið was certainly one for all the reasons that we've talked about.
Nice to hear.
Yes,
I'm honored.
And definitely a beautiful area all around there too. Just the landscape and the sort of countryside around in those regions. I think we went to a church not too far from there, which I forget the name of, but kind of the more unique style red church, and then also the Santa, the Christmas place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And did you go to the Skógarböð, the forest lagoon? Did you visit that?
No.
Oh, next time.
I know where it is, but that would be a future.
Yeah, because we had a meeting. I'm in the board for the travel, the tourist people in tourism in this countryside. I'm in the board, and we had a meeting last night, and we are trying to put our strengths together to be a bigger magnet into the countryside.
Yeah.
help each other out and talk about each other. And Skógarböðin, they are the biggest magnet. They have 50 employees. I have one, but they are like they're in this with us, and they want to help, and that's good.
Yeah, there's something about the lagoons that they always just attract the most. Maybe it's the luxury, the spa.
Everybody wants to bathe. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you would like to say if people are listening to this and are wanting to visit Hælið? Maybe what days of the week you're open, these sorts of things?
Yeah, definitely come during the summer because I'm open every day, June, July, and August. But if you're in a group of more than 10 people, you can always check if I can open for you. And I always open if I'm not just busy doing other things, which I am sometimes. But please check, and I will find some time.
Mm-hmm.
And welcome, just welcome.
And like we said, there's lots of other things to do in the area too. So people could really spend a lot of time in Akureyri and around those regions.
You don't always have to rush to Mývatnssveit. Of course, you have to go there, but you can also take a day in the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we now, have you heard about the gigantic cow?
No.
Risakýrin Edda. That's something we did in the tourism board. We talked to this blacksmith. She's living in just close to Hælið. She's living in Kristnes at the farm, and she's a blacksmith. She's from Norway. Her name is Beate Stormo, and we cooperated with her. We collected 5 million kroners, and she built this beautiful cow. This cow is 3 meters high, 5 meters wide, and is all made with. She is referring to the handcraft víravirki, which is the method you use when you do the old gold and silver for the national costume. It's like a method in jewelry making, I think.
Okay.
So the cow is beautiful, all oriented, and it's like hollow. There's like just air inside. Everything is hollow except from the head is massive. Her, what do you say, where the milk comes from? What is that called in English?
Udders.
That is also whole, not hollow. And then the legs. But otherwise she's just so gorgeous, standing on a hill just close to this Sörbæjarkirkja, the church at Sörbæ, and where we have the Museum of Little Things. Did you visit the Museum of Little Things? No. So that's further inside the fjord. It's more south. It's south of Hælið. So that's a place you have to visit, and more places. We also have Brúnir horse, where they have the Icelandic horse, and they make some horse shows, and so much to do.
Yes, it's certainly so. More and more things to do. It's really quite fantastic. What a country Iceland is.
Yeah. And I have never been to your place. I have to go. I have to come and visit you guys. Where are you living?
Yeah, so I'm in Calgary, which is in Alberta, which is like Western Canada, and just before the Rocky Mountains. So this is maybe Banff you've heard of? Banff
I've
National
heard of
Park.
Calgary. Also, you had the Olympics once.
Yes, the 1988 Olympics. And we also have the Calgary Stampede every year, which is like a big cowboy event and talking about cows and that sort of thing. That's a really big aspect to it.
The most like Icelanders, are they all over the place now? The people with Icelandic roots, or are they mostly in Gimli and there?
Yeah, well, certainly, traditionally it's been like North Dakota in the United States, Wisconsin, Minnesota, these places where the Icelanders were first going to settle. And then in Canada, Gimli, Manitoba, or in the prairies in Saskatchewan. But then also here in Alberta too, Stephen G. Stephenson. He was in Markerville, which is just right by Calgary and really close to where I grew up. So he was well known even for people without Icelandic ancestry. He was just kind of a cultural figure for this region and very well known. But yeah, now today, I mean, it spreads out even more. Jason Doctor, who's a member of Icelandic Roots, he lives in California and has his Icelandic roots connected, I think, through Minnesota.
Okay.
So, you know, that's how North America is, right? People really spread out all over the place. But in the areas where Icelanders have traditionally been, there's still quite a strong connection. And we really try to maintain, you know, these Icelandic sort of communities and this
And
sort of
if I
thing.
would visit, when should I come? Is there something special I should not miss?
Well, I would say likewise to come during the summer. You know, it's winter time around here gets far colder than in Iceland, right? So minus 20 to minus 30 during really, really cold. And I think in some ways more snow, maybe. I don't know. Maybe Akureyri is a bit different. But yeah, I don't know. It's really...
I mean, are there some gatherings or some Icelandic, do you do something special?
Well, sure. What am I saying, actually? You should go to Íslendingadagurinn in Gimli, so the Icelandic festival. And then the Deuce of August is the one in Mountain, North Dakota. And they're the same weekend, which is, I don't know off the top of my head, middle of August or something.
Okay.
And so that's either Gimli near Winnipeg or Mountain, North Dakota, which is close by too. And those are the really biggest Icelandic festivals in all of North America. So that is, of course, when you should come.
I have to look into it and come visit.
Yes. Okay. Well, Maria, is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap up here?
I just want to thank you for this interesting conversation. It's been a pleasure. I think there's nothing else I have to really have to say.
Yes, sure. Well, likewise, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. Again, thank you for all the work you've done at the museum, too. And yes, thank you for speaking with our audience here today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, bless.
Bless.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of the podcast. Now, before you leave, I have a quick favor to ask you. Here at Icelandic Roots, we've been growing our social media presence. You're hopefully already familiar with our blog, which shares lots of incredible articles about all these different dynamics of history, about Iceland, and really, as everything is connected, about the world. You should know, of course, that Icelandic Roots is a genealogy database, so if you have Icelandic ancestry and are not yet utilizing the Icelandic Roots database, then join us as a member to get access to your family history. Now, beyond that, on the podcast side of things, we would like to ask you to rate this episode. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, there's a little rating feature. You can give us 5 stars or 3 stars. However you respond to the podcast, let us know. We're interested in hearing feedback. So leave a review, send us a message. You can do this on Spotify as well. This would help this podcast to reach more people so they can learn from different aspects of history, such as tuberculosis in Iceland. So as always, we thank you very much for tuning into these episodes, and maybe why don't you share this with a friend as well. Share this with family or friends on social media or word of mouth. We really, really appreciate all of your support and being part of the Icelandic Roots community. So thank you for listening. Takk fyrir, bless, and sjáumst. See you at the next one.